You can just stick around up here. So there's just two presentations in that little section. So Harrison and Ben Min are open for questions. Anybody has any? Yeah.
Do you think there might be epigenetic factors play in cold hardiness? For example, if you layer wine, you can get epigenetic factors conveyed, but if you take cuttings, they're not conveyed. So by taking fine cuttings from survivors, they didn't survive. Did you think there's a factor?
So basically, the question is, am I thinking about like the epigenetic plays a role in those survivor situation? Those one I selected might have those epigenetic effects, right? And the rest, the tender one I got actually doesn't. Is that the kind of question? Your question?
The question is, would an epigenetic factor affect survival?
Oh, I'm not so sure. I'm not really into that area. Yeah. So I'm more into physics side of the vineyard. Yeah. So that's the reason I kind of like think about using the probability model to explain those freezing events. Yeah.
Maybe Letitia will be able to answer that one day.
Yeah, and we are writing a proposal. Yeah.
So we have a relatively new scientist that will fill in that sort of.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Go. Yeah.
Okay. You're a moderator. Sorry.
I'll sit down.
I mean, you sort of pulled it up in your table message where you say that the 50% mitigation is probably less stress than the other scenario. So I was curious, those 50% mitigation treatments, so were plants severely stressed, or it was like a moderate stress or most?
Oh, you're talking about block 5 versus 50%. Yeah, so I think the block 5 situation is somewhere less than that 50% treatment. Yeah, so it wasn't included in the original irrigation trial, and we hasn't really measured how much less water that block got.
Yeah, but for the original, the first study, it was 50, 67, and another 50.
Yeah.
So I was curious if there were data about how stressed they were actually the vines.
Oh, yeah, so that's the data I'll be showing in Pat's project. So that kind of like both of them like work in the same vineyard. So I do include the kind of like a stress level, yeah, in that in the later presentation. Yeah, so you will see it. Yeah. Let's see.
My question is for both Harrison and Ben Min. It has been a lot of talk here in BC after our last freezing event of we do hybrids and more hardier hybrids. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I just want you to develop on this. I mean, my understanding is the problem we are having is we are getting warmer winters. So even these hybrids will not have enough time to acclimate to the maximum capacity. They can't. They still need to have that, long period of cold to acclimate to. You talk about market, other Minnesota varieties. If we are going the previous week be at 0 to 2 degrees, and the following week having a vortex to -28, I don't think really matters if you are having a hybrid of vinifera. Both are going to be. Am I right in that assumption?
Sorry, I'm on the first little speaker. Could you repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the question was, like just like a Harrison data shows, the even market, right? They are super hardy in Minnesota, but they requires that gradual change of temperature going to closer to those maximum LT50 to get their best performance. But because of climate change, now the winter is so warm. Does that matter? Like, even though those are hybrid, does that really help the industry to secure the crop? Yeah, I think that's the question. A little bit too wordy, but so I think Harrison, yeah.
So Jose, I can say you're right. So, and actually some of the hybrids, especially the Minnesota ones or some of the ones that are quite hardy, they respond even more quickly to heat than some of the vinifera. This being said, I've seen this we've had quite a few experiences with freezes here in Nova Scotia, and especially our vineyard here at the center. You're still better off having a Marquette. Even, I mean, the vinifera, they deacclimated as well. They deacclimated on average like 2 or 2.5 degrees. Some of the really hardy hybrids, they deacclimated 3 or 3.5 degrees. So we still had a crop even on the hybrids that were quite hardy, even though it was damaged at temperatures that we expect them to be able to handle, but when it's warm, they don't. But the vinifera had no crop. I will say one other thing. We're just talking most of this data we were looking at was looking at DTA bud hardiness data. So other thing I've come to learn over the years that there's something in the North American genetics that is very different in terms of the wood and the vascular cambium, how hardy it is. So it's harder to measure. It's harder to measure. I mean, it's really nice using DTA numbers. We get nice crisp numbers where we see the peaks and everything. It gives very nice data. It's a little bit more subjective, trying to assess, vascular cambium death or vascular cambium damage. They get damaged every year. It's more of a question of degree. But I can say I've seen this several times. We've had several trials where even, for example, we had a trial we were looking at Riesling versus Vidal, and they're not so different in their bud hardiness. They're only different by 1 or 2 degrees. Vidal's not that hardy for a hybrid. And it got hit about 3 times in the course of 5 or 6 years. And the Riesling, we lost, they lost a lot of buds to Vidal as well. But over that course of that study, we lost about 70% of our Riesling vines, and we only lost less than 2% of our Vidal vines. There seems to be something in the nature of some of these North American vitis species that they can shrug off losing their buds. They seem to be evolved to lose their buds or lose their fruit every few years or so. So their vascular system is much hardier, even hardier, more hardy than their hardier bud hardiness suggests. So quite often, a Marquette, like same as the Marquette, we lost fruit there, but we didn't lose a single vine in our vineyard. Whereas a similar amount of loss of buds in a vinifera species, even at a warmer temperature or a less freezing temperature, you get more death. So and a lot of that hasn't been well studied. So I mean, losing your crop 1 year is a pretty big loss, but when you lose the whole vine, you lose several years of production when you have to, first of all, make the decision whether you have enough death to pull that vineyard or not, and then replanting and waiting for them to come into production again. So I'm not sure if that answered your question or not, but
yeah, I basically have the same thought like a Harrison, and also I'm thinking actually the damage have 2 levels. One is the damage to the crop, the yield, but also the damage to the survival of the vine itself. And the other thing, I think in the previous R&D committee meeting, I mentioned about the latent buds numbers might play a role here. I don't know if Harrison agree with this. And so since I'm using the probability method to explain all this stuff, so if the vine has so many latent buds, that also means one of the bud might survive those cold events, but in the same time, maybe vinifera just doesn't have that many latent buds, so the vine will be destroyed easier than those American hybrid. Yeah, this is just a hypothesis. Yeah. And the latent bud, we don't know where they are actually. It's so hard to understand.
One other thing, Ben or Jose, I'll mention about hybrids. I used to not think that much of, like Lacadie, I mentioned before, it's our #1 cultivar here in Nova Scotia. It's not particularly hardy in terms of its buds, its primary buds. It's hardier than most of the vinifera. It's not as hardy as a lot of the Minnesota varieties. but there's a lot of hybrids, and Lackady is one of these ones that has this and has a lot of this, and that's how fruitful its secondary, tertiary, even quaternary buds are. So we've had Lackady, for example, a couple of years at the polar vortex. I'll go back to the polar vortex in 2023 for us. We lost, the viability of the primary buds was something below 15%. So if that was a vinifera, you'd have almost no crop. You'd have, maybe a few hundred grams per vine. But the secondary and tertiary buds on the Lackady were so fruitful that, with some extra canes, we actually got 5 tons an acre, which is a normal crop, off the Lackady. It's not particularly hardy. It loses its primary buds more earlier than even some other hybrids and stuff like that. But certain hybrids have this quality of they're so fruitful in their secondary. Again, this is the evolution of they're used to losing a crop every other year or so, and so they've built in these mechanisms to help compensate it that allow the European vinifera just don't possess. I'm not. It sounds like I'm just promoting hybrids. I'm not, but there's these characteristics that are redeeming.
Right. So I'm also seeing like a Riesling has a similar behavior, right? Well, probably Riesling is the closest. I mean, vinifera behave like this, have a relatively fruitful secondary or tertiary buds. Yeah.
That probably in Okanagan, I will say in Nova Scotia, that's not the case, but probably because you guys get a lot more heat than we do around bloom time. Yeah.
For questions, there's nothing in the chat, so still got time.
Now going back to your irrigation trial, so the 80 millimeter precipitation rate you quoted, that was 100%.
Right.
But did you? So that was applied on a calendar basis, basically, or did you take evapotranspiration consideration?
I think
did you adjust at all to this?
No, probably not. Yeah, that's based on because Pat and Carl conducted experiment repeatedly in the same block. So I'm just retrieving that information from their previous note. Yeah, I'm not so sure if they're keeping exactly the same practice during that year, but I assume that's similar. Yeah, and I'm not really aware many people are using those ET estimation method right now. Yeah, most of growers are using a regular, calendar type of irrigation.
Yeah, but if you are trying to conserve water, adjusting to the environment probably would make sense, right? If you have a lot of precipitation. Okay.
Right, and also the other thing I've noticed is the irrigation is for the future usage, and most of the time we're actually calculating an ET of the past. So I feel like, maybe we should change that practice just using the predicted ET. Right.
Yeah.
And also the other thing is how to calculate the crop coefficient. Yeah. So these questions will be addressed in the new SCAP round.
Good.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah.
If you were talking about how irrigation affects cold hardiness, are you going to find other factors that could be affecting cold hardiness? Can I experiment or next?
So the question is, except the irrigation factors, am I going to find other or try other factors might influence cold hardiness? So actually, I'm thinking the bud size itself might explain so many of that. And still, that relate to the probability things. If you have a bigger cells, you have more location that the ice crystal might form. Also means the cold hardness might be worse in this case. Now, bigger the cell or bigger the buds, they have a higher chance to be frozen. And so I'm talking about mechanism right now. So from this mechanism, you can actually link to so many different factors which might actually affect this mechanism. So except the size of the buds, the other thing I'm interested in is why the ice, when they forming in the primary buds, why they couldn't, or it's hard for them to kind of like goes into tertiary buds. There must be some barrier or some anatomic structure stop those behavior. So that's probably also play in the role like why this variety has a better cold hardiness than the other. Yeah. So I'm not really directly address your question, but it's about like the mechanism side. Yeah.
Any other questions? We're still got lots of time, so.
Do you factor in rootstocks at all? Like, are the rootstocks passing on any cold hardiness traits at all?
Rootstock study was also conducted in Washington State, and they also found there's not much impact over there. But my hypothesis is actually that's because both of these sites we irrigate, right? So irrigation zone actually restrict how the roots will behave. But some other places like maybe Nova Scotia, these rootstocks might show their personality a little bit more. So there's more water available, right? So that restricting, for example, influence the root zone size, and that will basically influence how often they are going into water stress. Right? If you have a bigger root zone and full of water, that vine probably you could use that bunch of water longer time, and which means they seldom goes into real water stress. But the rootstock with a smaller root size, they might repeatedly suffer from water stress, right? So maybe that's the reason some rootstock might contribute to better cold hardiness. So with this information, I have to provide the other background information. I actually did another experiment or measure or observation, and what I found was the longer the internodes is, actually the tender the buds is. So even in one shoots, those are basal bud, they do have a better cold hardiness. Yeah, so maybe that's still connect to the bud size hypothesis.
Is there maybe a rootstock that doesn't get sucked in by warmer winter temperatures that keeps the plant dormant in the fact that you have a warm winter? Is there any work being done on that side?
You mean, sorry?
On a rootstock that can maintain dormancy in the plant even when the getting warmer in January, that it keeps the plant dormant better.
I'm not aware of that. Like, yeah, that's not. I'm more focused on the maximum cold hardiness. So right now I'm has less interest in the acclimation or acclimation rate.
I'm a rootstock guy.
So. Yeah, and I think Sue is also rootstock people here. Yeah, yeah. So the other thing I didn't mention about is the other mechanism, like how bumpy the cell membrane is. I think maybe that's more like a biochemical mechanism, right? So those the bumpiness of the kind of like a molecular surface will also influence how often or how easy the ice will forming. If you have really bumpy cell membranes, those water molecules, they might not be able to just like coincidentally, like perfectly touch together and just stay there. If you have bumpy surface, they're just like bouncing out easily. So in this case, that will decrease the LT50. Yeah.
Ben, I was going to a quick mention about rootstock and even irrigation and its effect on bud hardiness again, or on winter hardiness. In particular, we're talking bud hardiness. One thing that's good to keep in mind is that the buds really become quite isolated from the rest of the vine during the dormant season. And that's why maybe the irrigation studies and even the rootstocks, I've done a couple of rootstock trials and stuff, and quite often it has minimal impact on the buds themselves, even breaking time and things like that. And it's because the bud actually puts down a barrier like the vascular system actually disconnects from the bud throughout the dormant season. And so in some ways they kind of operate as two different entities a little bit, or for the most part. I'm not saying there's no crosstalk, but for the most part they operate as separate entities, the buds with the cane. That being said, if there is an effect of rootstock, and a lot of studies have shown that there's not a huge effect of rootstock on the bud hardiness, but if there is an effect, I could see there possibly being an effect on the vine hardness, the vascular cambium in the tissue of the vine itself, not the buds. If there's going to be any effect, I would think it'd be there and not necessarily in the bud of rootstock or irrigation on vine hardness, not necessarily the bud hardiness.
Yeah, Jose?
Two things. I think the first one is more of a comment, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but going to the literature and seeing so much work done on what can actually affect bud hardiness, there are very few things out there that actually affect bud hardiness. You talk about
The maximum, yeah.
And I mean, we have done bud hardiness work, looking into all the trials we have, with things, and it's actually, yeah, I mean, it's hard to find something that you can focus that actually you can see an effect of the bud hardness. And maybe, as you said, Harrison, is so isolated that it's hard to make any effect on that. No, you can comment on that, but it's hard to find anything that affects bud hardness.
Right. I think the genetic effects is the most, powerful one.
So that goes to my second question. Do you think, well, first, do you know any breeding programs, and there are very, very few across the world on grapes, that actually have implemented bud hardiness as a goal of the breeding program? I think no. I think most of the breeding program, hardiness is not the main goal of the breeding program for grapes. Disease resistance, other things.
Minnesota, yeah, University of Minnesota, that's the case, yeah.
That's for the yeah. I'm talking for 90% of the production is vinifera across the world. So do you think if you start a breeding program now, would you focus on breeding for bud hardiness or heat tolerance?
Or both, yeah.
Or both.
They might link, yeah. Yeah, so that's really depends on the industry needs, I think, like how we design a goal. Yeah. It's the quick comment.
I'm not putting this spot.
Okay, we have 3 minutes till break. One more question? Are we going once? Going twice? All right, thank you, Harrison. Thank you, Ben Min.
Thank you.